The alarm buzzed at 4:30 hours, but Dr. Sarah was already awake, her internal clock calibrated to the rhythm of military life. She lay still for 30 seconds in the narrow bunk, listening to the steady breathing of her two roommates in the cramped on-base apartment. Dr. Jennifer Walsh snored softly from the bottom bunk across the room, while Dr. Amanda Rodriguez shifted restlessly on the fold-out couch that served as their makeshift third bedroom. Sarah's feet hit the cold linoleum floor with practiced silence. 26 years old and 3 years into her residency at Fort Carson Army Medical Center, she had learned to move through the pre-dawn darkness like a ghost. Her calloused hands, still bearing thin white scars from childhood nights spent washing dishes in her parents' restaurant, reached for the instant coffee and patient charts she'd left on the small table the night before. The fluorescent light above the kitchenette hummed to life, casting harsh shadows across medical journals and anatomical diagrams. Sarah's methodical preparation was a ritual born of necessity and shaped by years of sacrifice. While her medical school classmates had spent summers interning at prestigious hospitals, she had worked double shifts at the family restaurant, serving tables and balancing books to help her immigrant parents keep their small business afloat. The daughter of Vietnamese refugees who had arrived in America with nothing but determination and a willingness to work 18-hour days, Sarah understood the weight of opportunity. Her parents had cleaned office buildings at night and run their tiny faux restaurant during the day, their English improving one customer interaction at a time. They had never spoken of their dreams deferred, only of hers that must be achieved. As steam rose from her coffee mug, chipped ceramic with the hospital logo fading from too many washings, Sarah reviewed the surgical notes from yesterday's procedures. Her handwriting was precise, economical, each word chosen for maximum clarity. The trauma ward had seen 3 major cases: a training accident involving an IED simulator, a helicopter mechanic caught in rotor wash, and Private Martinez, whose leg infection had nearly cost him his mobility. The base hospital's fluorescent hum mingled with the distant sound of helicopter rotors, creating the soundtrack that had become Sarah's life. Through the small window, she could see the first hints of dawn painting the Colorado mountains in shades of purple and gold. In 2 hours, she would be elbow-deep in surgery, making split-second decisions that meant the difference between a soldier returning home whole or returning home changed forever. Sarah traced a surgical diagram with her index finger, following the path of an arterial repair she had assisted with the previous week. The attending physician, Dr. Morgan, had praised her steady hands and quick thinking, but Sarah knew praise in the military medical system was as rare as leave time. She had learned to find satisfaction in the work itself, in the quiet moments when a patient's vital signs stabilized, when pain medications took effect, when a young soldier realized he would walk again. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Working late tonight. Dad says hello. Proud of you always." The message, sent at 2 a.m., reminded Sarah that while she was preparing for another day of military medicine, her parents were finishing another night of cleaning corporate offices, their backs bent over vacuum cleaners and mop buckets so that their daughter could save lives. Sarah finished her coffee and gathered her charts. The base was beginning to stir around her. The distant sound of reveille, the rumble of trucks carrying supplies, the measured footsteps of soldiers beginning their PT runs. In 30 minutes, she would join the controlled chaos of morning rounds, checking on patients whose names she had memorized, along with their injuries, their treatment plans, and their fears whispered in the darkness of the recovery ward. She paused at the small mirror by the door, adjusting her uniform and ensuring her hair was regulation perfect. The reflection showed a young woman whose dark eyes held the weight of responsibility beyond her years, whose steady hands had already saved more lives than most people her age had even touched. But it also showed someone who understood that in the military medical system, excellence was expected, not rewarded, and that every decision carried consequences that rippled far beyond the operating table. The morning light was growing stronger now, painting the base in sharp relief against the mountain backdrop. Sarah stepped out into the crisp Colorado air, her breath forming small clouds as she walked toward the hospital. Around her, Fort Carson was coming alive with the precision and purpose that defined military life. She had 15 minutes before rounds began, 15 minutes to prepare for whatever emergencies the day might bring. As she walked, Sarah thought about the letter she had received the previous week from her medical school friend David, now working at a prestigious hospital in Boston. He had written about his new BMW, his corner office view, and his upcoming vacation to Europe. The letter had mentioned almost casually that his starting salary was 3 times what Sarah earned as a military resident. But David had never held the hand of a 19-year-old soldier whose legs had been shattered by an IED. He had never seen the look in a mother's eyes when told her son would live. He had never understood that some forms of wealth couldn't be measured in dollars. The trauma ward smelled of antiseptic and hope, a combination that had become as familiar to Sarah as her own heartbeat. She moved through the corridors with quiet efficiency, her clipboard containing updates on 17 patients currently under her care. The morning light streamed through industrial windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like microscopic angels, each one catching the light before disappearing into the shadows. "Good morning, Private Martinez," Sarah said softly, approaching the bedside of a young soldier whose leg she had helped save the previous week. The 20-year-old from El Paso looked up with eyes that held both gratitude and the particular brand of restlessness that came from being confined to a hospital bed when your friends were out training for deployment. "Doc, when can I get back to my unit?" Martinez asked, the same question he posed every morning. His leg was elevated, wrapped in bandages that Sarah changed twice daily, monitoring for signs of infection that could still threaten the limb they had worked so hard to preserve. Sarah checked his IV line, her movements precise and gentle. The bag contained antibiotics that cost more than her parents made in a week, but she never allowed herself to think about the economics of military medicine. Her focus remained on the patient, on the young man who had written to her mother after learning about Sarah's family background, thanking her in broken Vietnamese he had learned from Google Translate. "Your infection markers are down another point," she said, adjusting the flow rate. "Dr. Morgan will make the final call, but I'd guess another week of immobilization, then physical therapy. You're healing faster than we expected." Martinez's face broke into a grin. "My grandmother always said I was too stubborn to stay broken." He paused, his expression growing serious. "Doc, I heard about what happened to Sergeant Williams yesterday. Is it true they won't let anyone treat him?" Sarah's hand stilled on his chart. News traveled fast in the close quarters of military life, and the arrival of the classified casualties had been impossible to hide completely. But the details were above her security clearance, and even discussing them could have consequences she wasn't prepared to face. "I can't talk about other patients, Martinez. You know that." She made a note on his chart, keeping her voice steady. "Focus on your own recovery. Your unit needs you healthy, not heroic." As she moved to the next bed, Sarah caught sight of Colonel Morrison through the window of the trauma bay's restricted section. The career military physician was standing with 2 men in suits, their conversation animated but conducted in the low tones that indicated classified information. Sarah had worked under Morrison for 2 years, and she had learned to read his moods like weather patterns. Today, his jaw was set in the particular way that meant someone, somewhere, had made a decision that would complicate everyone's life. Her next patient was Corporal Jackson, a helicopter mechanic who had been caught in rotor wash during a maintenance accident. His shoulder had been dislocated, his ribs bruised, but he had been lucky. Sarah had seen what helicopter blades could do to human beings, and luck was often the only thing that stood between minor injuries and catastrophic ones. "How's the pain level this morning?" she asked, helping him adjust his position in the bed. "About a 6, Jackson replied, "but I've had worse hangovers." His attempt at humor was undercut by the way he winced when he moved his arm. Sarah made a note to increase his pain medication slightly. In her experience, soldiers were notorious for understating their discomfort, viewing pain as weakness rather than information. As she continued her rounds, Sarah found herself thinking about Sergeant Williams, the patient she had glimpsed through the restricted bay window. She had seen enough trauma cases to recognize the signs of massive internal bleeding, the particular pallor that indicated a patient was fighting for his life. The fact that he was under classified restrictions meant his injuries were connected to an operation that existed in the shadow world of military intelligence, the realm where soldiers' names were redacted from official reports and their families were told only that they had died serving their country. Dr. Rodriguez appeared at Sarah's elbow, clipboard in hand, and exhaustion evident in her posture. Amanda had been on call the previous night, and the dark circles under her eyes told the story of another sleepless shift in the trauma ward. "Any word on the classified patient?" Amanda asked quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Above our pay grade," Sarah replied, but her eyes drifted toward the restricted bay. Through the glass she could see medical equipment that suggested the patient was in critical condition. Ventilator, multiple IV lines, monitoring equipment that painted pictures in electronic waves, and digital numbers. "Morrison's been in there for 3 hours," Amanda continued. "Whatever happened, it's got everyone nervous. I heard they're flying in specialists from Walter Reed." Sarah didn't respond, but her mind was working through the implications. Specialists from Walter Reed meant the case was beyond the capabilities of even Fort Carson's excellent trauma team. It meant the patient was important enough to warrant the best military medicine had to offer. And it meant that whatever operation had gone wrong, the consequences were significant enough to mobilize resources that were normally reserved for the highest levels of military command. The morning continued with its rhythm of routine checks, medication adjustments, and small conversations that served to remind both doctor and patient that healing was as much about human connection as medical intervention. Sarah listened to concerns about families left behind, fears about permanent disabilities, and dreams of returning to active duty. Each patient carried a story that extended far beyond their medical charts, and Sarah had learned that treating the person was often as important as treating the injury. As she completed her rounds, Sarah paused at the nurse's station to review the duty roster for the day. 2 surgeries were scheduled, both routine procedures that would help soldiers return to active duty. A training accident had been reported from the morning PT session, likely requiring orthopedic consultation. And somewhere in the restricted bay, Sergeant Williams was fighting for his life while specialists debated treatments that Sarah wasn't cleared to know about. The morning light had shifted, painting the trauma ward in the harsh brightness of full day. Around her, the hospital moved with the efficiency of a military operation, each person playing their assigned role in the complex choreography of military medicine. Sarah had found her place in this world, had earned the respect of her colleagues and the trust of her patients. But as she glanced once more toward the restricted bay, she felt the familiar tension between duty and conscience that defined military life. In 6 hours, that tension would be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. For now, she had patients to treat, charts to update, and the countless small decisions that filled a military doctor's day. The ordinary morning was drawing to a close, and Sarah had no way of knowing that extraordinary events were already in motion. The first alarm cut through the afternoon quiet like a blade through silk. Sarah looked up from Private Martinez's chart as the sound echoed through the trauma ward, followed immediately by the deeper, more urgent tone that indicated incoming casualties. Around her, the hospital transformed from routine medical facility to combat-ready trauma center in the space of seconds. "Mass casualty event, all hands to trauma stations," the intercom crackled. "Repeat, mass casualty, all hands to trauma stations." Sarah dropped her clipboard and ran toward the emergency bay, her feet finding their rhythm in the controlled chaos that she had trained for but hoped never to experience. Through the large windows, she could see the distinctive silhouettes of Black Hawk helicopters approaching fast, their rotors beating the air with urgent intensity. The sound grew louder, more insistent, until it seemed to shake the building itself. The first helicopter touched down on the landing pad, and Sarah could see medical personnel rushing toward it with stretchers and equipment. Whatever had happened, it was bad enough to warrant emergency evacuation from what was obviously a classified operation. The soldiers being unloaded were not wearing standard training gear, and their injuries were consistent with combat rather than exercises. Sarah reached the trauma bay and found Colonel Morrison standing like a stone wall in front of the restricted access doors. His face was set in the expression she had learned to recognize as his command decision look, the particular combination of authority and regret that came with making choices that would affect other people's lives. "Restricted access, Dr. Sarah. Orders from the top." His voice carried the weight of absolute finality. Behind him, she could see through the glass partition into the restricted bay, where medical personnel were working with the intensity that indicated life or death situations. "Sir, I'm trauma qualified. If there are casualties—" "Not your concern, Doctor. Return to your regular duties." Morrison's interruption was sharp, but Sarah caught something in his eyes that looked almost like apology. Whatever orders he had received, they weren't ones he was comfortable with. Sarah stepped back, but her position near the glass wall gave her a clear view into the restricted area. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. On the nearest gurney lay a soldier whose condition was critical beyond question. Massive internal bleeding was evident from the distension of his abdomen, and his skin had taken on the particular pallor that indicated severe blood loss. The monitors showed vital signs that were barely sustainable. The patient's face was partially obscured by an oxygen mask, but something about his build, his hair color, triggered a memory. Sarah moved slightly to get a better angle, and her heart stopped. The dog tags visible on his chest caught the harsh fluorescent light, and she could make out the name. Williams, S. Sergeant Williams. She remembered him now. 6 months ago, he had come to the clinic with an infected wound on his arm, a minor injury that had become complicated by his reluctance to seek treatment, the kind of stoic acceptance of pain that marked career soldiers. Sarah had treated the infection, but more importantly, she had listened to his stories about his 8-year-old daughter, Emma, who drew pictures of soldiers and sent them to her father's unit. Williams had been touched by Sarah's attention to his case, and when he learned about her family background, her parents' struggles as immigrants, their sacrifice to put her through medical school, he had written them a letter of thanks. Not to Sarah, but to her parents, in carefully composed English that spoke of respect and gratitude. Her mother had cried when she read it, and her father had framed it and hung it next to Sarah's medical school diploma. Now Sergeant Williams was dying in front of her, and she was powerless to help because of classifications and clearances and the invisible walls that military bureaucracy erected around human suffering. Through the glass, Sarah watched the medical team working with increasing desperation. Dr. Peterson, one of the hospital's most experienced trauma surgeons, was leading the effort, but even from a distance, Sarah could see that they were losing the battle. William's blood pressure was dropping, his heart rate becoming erratic. The massive internal bleeding required immediate surgical intervention, but the restricted protocols were slowing everything down. Sarah looked at her watch. Williams had maybe an hour before the blood loss became irreversible. Probably less. She had seen enough trauma cases to recognize the signs, to know that window between life and death that every emergency physician learned to calculate with terrible precision. Colonel Morrison stepped away from the restricted bay doors, called aside by one of the men in suits for what appeared to be an urgent phone call. Sarah watched him walk toward the administrative offices, his attention focused on whatever crisis was developing beyond the immediate medical emergency. The restricted bay doors were unguarded now, protected only by military protocol, and the assumption that orders would be followed without question. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, calculating risks and consequences. Her career, her family's pride, her future in military medicine, all of it balanced against the life of a man who had once written a thank you letter to her immigrant parents. Through the glass, Sergeant Williams' vital signs continued their downward spiral. The medical team was doing everything they could within the constraints of their security clearance, but those constraints were becoming a death sentence. In the distance, Sarah could hear Colonel Morrison's voice raised in what sounded like an argument, the kind of heated discussion that occurred when field realities conflited with command decisions. Sarah's hands were steady as she looked at the restricted bay doors. Her training had prepared her for many things, but not for the moment when protocol and conscience would stand in direct opposition, when following orders meant watching someone die who could be saved. She thought about her parents, working their night shift at the office building across town, trusting that their daughter was making them proud in the career they had sacrificed everything to make possible. She thought about Private Martinez, healing in his bed because she had fought to save his leg. She thought about the oath she had taken, the promise to do no harm that had guided every decision of her medical career. And she thought about Emma Williams, 8 years old, drawing pictures of soldiers, waiting for a father who might never come home because bureaucracy had been placed above medicine. The restricted bay doors were only 20 feet away, 20 feet between following orders and saving a life, 20 feet between safety and the unknown consequences of choosing conscience over command. Sarah's feet began to move, carrying her toward a decision that would change everything. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the restricted bay doors, but her resolve was steel solid. 23 years of her parents' sacrifices, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of residency. All of it had led to this moment when training and conscience demanded action regardless of consequences. The doors swung open with a soft hydraulic hiss, and suddenly she was inside the restricted area, surrounded by the organized chaos of a trauma team fighting to save a life. Dr. Peterson looked up from the patient, his face showing surprise and concern. "Sarah, you can't be in here. This is classified." "He's hemorrhaging into his abdomen," Sarah interrupted, moving to the opposite side of the gurney. "Probably splenic laceration. Maybe liver involvement. We need to get him to OR now, or we're going to lose him." Dr. Peterson's eyes darted toward the doors, clearly torn between medical necessity and military protocol. "The orders are specific. No unauthorized personnel. They're flying in specialists. He'll be dead before they arrive." Sarah was already examining Williams, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the breach of protocol she was committing. His pulse was thready, his breathing shallow. The blood pressure readings on the monitor were dropping steadily into dangerous territory. "Look at his vitals. We have maybe 40 minutes before this becomes irreversible." William's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Sarah with difficulty. His lips, pale from blood loss, moved soundlessly at first, then formed words she had to lean close to hear. "Emma," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the beeping monitors. "Tell Emma, Daddy tried." Sarah felt something break inside her chest. This wasn't just another patient, another case to be managed according to protocol. This was a father, a man who had written thank you letters to immigrant parents, a soldier whose daughter drew pictures of heroes and waited for bedtime stories about his adventures. "You're going to tell her yourself," Sarah said firmly, beginning her examination. Her hands found the source of the bleeding quickly, a penetrating wound to the left side that had likely damaged the spleen and possibly nicked the liver, the kind of injury that was completely survivable with immediate surgical intervention, but fatal if left untreated. "Dr. Peterson, I need a large-bore IV stat, and get me 2 units of O-negative blood." Sarah's voice carried the authority of medical emergency, the tone that cut through bureaucracy and protocol when seconds meant the difference between life and death. "Sarah, I can't authorize—" "Then don't authorize it, but don't stop me either." She looked up at Peterson, her eyes carrying both plea and challenge. "You know what needs to be done here. You know we can save him." Peterson hesitated for a moment, then began moving with purpose. Janet, large bore IV, 18 gauge, and call for those blood units. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude mixed with terror. Peterson was risking his career too now, complicit in her violation of direct orders. But Williams's vital signs were stabilizing slightly with the increased fluid support, and Sarah could see the faint possibility of success emerging from what had seemed like certain death. She worked steadily, her movements economical and precise. The training that had cost her parents everything, the skills developed through countless hours of study and practice, all focused on the task of keeping Sergeant Williams alive long enough to repair the damage that was slowly killing him. "Blood pressure's coming up," called Janet, the trauma nurse who had worked with Sarah on dozens of cases. Her voice carried relief and encouragement, the professional satisfaction of watching someone step back from the edge of death. Williams's eyes opened again, more focused now. "Doc," he managed, his voice stronger. "My daughter. She draws pictures of doctors now, says she wants to be like the lady who helped Daddy." Sarah felt tears threatening but kept her hands steady. "What's her favorite color?" "Purple." Williams smiled weakly. "Everything has to be purple. Purple crayons, purple backpack, purple everything." "Then you better get well so you can buy her a purple pony," Sarah said, checking his pupil response. The signs were encouraging. Blood pressure stabilizing, heart rate becoming more regular, the immediate crisis passing. For 47 minutes, Sarah worked to stabilize Williams while Dr. Peterson assisted, and the trauma team followed her lead. It was the longest 47 minutes of her career, each second weighted with the knowledge that she was violating direct orders, potentially compromising national security, and certainly ending her military medical career. But Williams was alive. His vital signs were stable, his bleeding controlled, his chances of survival transformed from nearly zero to reasonably good. Sarah had done what she had trained to do, what her oath had demanded, what her conscience had required. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside broke the focused calm of the trauma bay. Sarah looked up to see Colonel Morrison returning, his face set in lines of grim determination. Behind him walked two of the men in suits, their expressions unreadable but unmistakably serious. "Dr. Sarah," Morrison's voice carried the weight of command authority and profound disappointment. "Step away from the patient, now." Sarah's hand stilled on Williams's chart, but she didn't move away from the bedside. "Sir, the patient is stable now. His condition is no longer your concern." Morrison's voice cut through her explanation like a scalpel. "You have violated direct orders, compromised security protocols, and potentially damaged classified operations. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately." The trauma bay fell silent, except for the steady beeping of Williams's monitors, sounds that indicated a life saved, a mission accomplished despite the cost. Sarah looked down at her patient, who was watching the scene with growing awareness of what was happening. "Thank you," Williams whispered, so quietly that only Sarah could hear. "Tell your parents. Tell them they raised a hero." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. She removed her gloves and placed them in the disposal unit, her movements deliberate and dignified, despite the magnitude of what was happening. 23 years of her parents' dreams, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of residency, all of it ending because she had chosen to save a life rather than follow orders. But as she walked toward the doors of the restricted bay, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected. Not regret, not fear, but a strange sense of completion. She had done what she was trained to do, what she was called to do, what her parents had sacrificed everything to make possible. Behind her, Sergeant Williams' vital signs continued their steady rhythm, the electronic confirmation that 47 minutes of unauthorized medicine had bought him time to see his daughter again, to hear about her purple drawings, to be the hero she believed him to be. The consequences were just beginning. The base commander's office felt smaller than usual as Sarah stood at attention, facing Colonel Morrison, and Base Commander General Patricia Hayes. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished desk that had witnessed countless military careers being made and broken. Sarah's uniform was pressed to perfection, her posture regulation straight. But nothing could disguise the fact that she was about to face the consequences of her decision. General Hayes was a career military officer whose reputation for fairness was matched only by her reputation for holding people accountable for their actions. She had risen through the ranks at a time when women in military leadership faced obstacles that younger officers like Sarah could barely imagine. Her expression as she reviewed Sarah's file was unreadable, but the weight of command authority filled the room like a physical presence. "Dr. Sarah," General Hayes began, her voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded major decisions. "You have served with distinction for 3 years. Your medical skills are exemplary. Your dedication to patient care is noted throughout your file, and your colleagues speak highly of your professionalism." Sarah remained silent, knowing that everything positive was merely preface to what was coming next. "However," Hayes continued, "yesterday you violated direct orders, breached security protocols, and potentially compromised classified operations. Colonel Morrison, please outline the charges." Morrison stepped forward, his face showing the particular discomfort of a commanding officer forced to discipline someone he respected. "Dr. Sarah is charged with disobeying direct orders, unauthorized access to classified medical information, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. The patient in question was part of a classified operation, and Dr. Sarah's unauthorized treatment potentially exposed sensitive intelligence information." Sarah felt the weight of military justice settling around her like a shroud. The charges were serious, the kind that could result not just in discharge, but in criminal prosecution. But even facing the destruction of everything she had worked for, she couldn't bring herself to regret saving Williams's life. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" General Hayes asked. Sarah met her commanding officer's eyes directly. "Ma'am, Sergeant Williams was dying. His injuries were treatable, but time was critical. I took an oath to do no harm, and watching him die when I could save him would have violated that oath." "You also took an oath to obey lawful orders," Morrison interjected. "Military medicine requires discipline, Dr. Sarah. We cannot have medical personnel making independent decisions about classified cases." "With respect, sir, medicine isn't always compatible with classification levels. A severed artery doesn't recognize security clearances." General Hayes raised a hand, stopping the exchange. "Dr. Sarah, your commitment to patient care is noted and appreciated. However, military service requires that personal judgment be subordinated to command authority. The classified nature of Sergeant Williams's case involved national security considerations that extend far beyond medical treatment." Sarah nodded, understanding that her fate was already decided. The military justice system wasn't designed to reward individual initiative that contradicted orders, regardless of the outcome. "Therefore," Hayes continued, "you are hereby stripped of surgical privileges, pending a full investigation. You will be reassigned to administrative duties while we determine appropriate disciplinary action." The words fell like hammer blows. Surgical privileges were the heart of Sarah's identity as a military physician. Without them, she was reduced to paperwork and bureaucracy, her years of training rendered irrelevant by a single decision to put patient care above protocol. But worse was yet to come. 2 hours later, Sarah found herself standing in front of the entire medical staff, assembled in the hospital's main conference room for what General Hayes called a teaching moment about military discipline. The room was full of colleagues she had worked beside for 3 years, residents she had mentored, nurses who had trusted her judgment in life and death situations. "Let this serve as a reminder," General Hayes announced to the assembled staff, "that military medicine operates within a chain of command. Individual initiative, no matter how well-intentioned, cannot supersede direct orders. Dr. Sarah's actions, while motivated by medical concerns, violated fundamental principles of military discipline." Sarah stood at attention while her career was dissected in front of people who had respected her, colleagues who had depended on her skills and judgment. The humiliation was methodical and complete, designed to send a message that would resonate throughout the medical staff. Following orders was more important than individual medical judgment. Dr. Peterson avoided her eyes. Dr. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Even Private Martinez, watching from his wheelchair in the back of the room, seemed confused by the spectacle of watching his doctor being publicly disciplined for saving a life. The local news picked up the story within hours. "Military doctor defies orders to treat classified patient" was the headline that appeared on the evening broadcast, complete with footage of Fort Carson and speculation about what classified operation had gone wrong. The story painted Sarah as either a hero who put medical ethics above military protocol or a rogue doctor who had compromised national security for personal conscience. Sarah's phone rang constantly. Reporters wanting interviews, colleagues expressing private support they couldn't voice publicly, and most painfully, her parents calling from their night shift cleaning job, confused and frightened by the attention their daughter's actions had brought to their quiet lives. "Sarah, what is happening?" Her mother's voice was small and worried on the phone. "The reporters came to the restaurant. They asked about you, about our family. Did you do something wrong?" How could Sarah explain that she had done something right in a system that valued compliance over conscience? How could she tell her parents, who had sacrificed everything for her education, that she might lose her medical career for saving a life? "I helped someone who was hurt, Mama, but the rules said I wasn't supposed to help him." "You are doctor," her mother replied, with the simple logic that had guided her through decades of struggle. "Doctors help people who are hurt. This is what we work for, what we save money for. You help people." That night, Sarah sat in her small apartment, surrounded by medical journals and textbooks that might soon be useless to her. The television droned in the background, cycling through news stories that portrayed her as either hero or villain, depending on the network's political perspective. But the only opinion that mattered was her own, and despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to regret the 47 minutes she had spent saving Sergeant Williams' life. Her medical license was under review by the state board. Her military career was effectively over. Her parents were facing unwanted media attention that could hurt their small business. Fellow residents were avoiding her to protect their own careers. But somewhere in the hospital's recovery ward, Sergeant Williams was alive, probably thinking about purple crayons and an 8-year-old daughter who drew pictures of heroes. The cost of her decision was becoming clear. The consequences were just beginning. The discharge papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a young corporal who couldn't meet Sarah's eyes as he handed over the manila envelope that contained the destruction of everything she had worked toward. Sarah signed for the delivery with steady hands, but her signature looked different somehow, shakier, less certain than the confident script that had once authorized medications and treatment plans. The papers were official, formal, and final. Honorable discharge due to conduct inconsistent with military discipline and good order. It was the kind of language that looked reasonable on paper but felt like a dagger when applied to your own life. Along with the discharge came a recommendation that she never be permitted to practice medicine in any federal facility. A black mark that would follow her to every hospital, every clinic, every medical institution that had contracts with the government, which in modern American healthcare was virtually all of them. Sarah sat at the small table in her apartment, reading through the documentation that officially ended her military medical career. 3 years of residency, 4 years of medical school, and countless hours of studying and sacrifice, all reduced to a stack of papers that concluded with the recommendation that she be barred from federal medical practice. The knock on her door came as she was packing her few belongings. Dr. Rodriguez stood in the hallway, holding a small potted plant and looking uncomfortable. "I wanted to say goodbye," Amanda said, stepping into the apartment, "and to tell you that what you did, a lot of us think you were right." "A lot of you think I was right, but none of you are willing to say so publicly," Sarah replied, not bitterly, but with the tired resignation of someone who understood the realities of institutional politics. "Sarah, you know how this works. We're residents. We have no power here. If we speak up, we just destroy our own careers without helping you at all." Sarah nodded, understanding the calculus even as it stung. Amanda was right. Junior medical staff had no leverage in military disciplinary matters. Speaking out would only create more casualties without changing the outcome. "How is he, Williams?" Sarah asked. "Recovering well. They moved him to Walter Reed for specialized care, but the word is he's going to make a full recovery. He's going to see his daughter again because of what you did." The plant Amanda had brought was a small succulent, the kind that thrived in harsh conditions with minimal care. "It's called a survivor plant," Amanda explained. "Seemed appropriate." After Amanda left, Sarah continued packing. Her medical books would go into storage, too expensive to throw away, too painful to keep visible. Her stethoscope, the one her parents had bought her for medical school graduation, went into a small box, along with the few personal items that had made her military housing feel like home. The hardest call was to her parents. Sarah waited until she knew they would be between shifts, that brief window when they were home but not yet asleep from exhaustion. "Mama, I need to tell you something about my job." Her mother's voice immediately shifted to concern. "What is wrong? Are you hurt?" "No, Mama, but I'm not going to be a military doctor anymore. They're making me leave because of what I did to help that soldier." The silence on the phone stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if the connection had been lost. Finally, her father's voice came on the line. He had picked up the extension, something he only did for important conversations. "Sarah, did you do the right thing?" he asked in his careful English. "Yes, Papa. I saved someone's life." "Then we are proud of you. Jobs come and go, honor stays forever." But Sarah knew it wasn't that simple. Her parents had sacrificed everything for her medical career. They had worked multiple jobs, saved every penny, deferred every dream so their daughter could become a doctor. Now that career was over, ended by a decision that had lasted 47 minutes, but would affect the rest of her life. The state medical board review was scheduled for the following month. The proceedings would determine whether Sarah would be allowed to practice medicine anywhere in the United States. The charges were serious: conduct unbecoming a medical professional and violation of patient confidentiality protocols. Even if she won the review, the legal costs would bankrupt her, and the publicity would make it nearly impossible to find employment at any major medical facility. Sarah's student loan debt, deferred during her military service, would resume with interest. $87,000 that had seemed manageable on a military physician's salary now loomed like an insurmountable mountain. Without the loan forgiveness programs available to military doctors, she would be paying for her medical education for the next 20 years, assuming she could find work that would allow her to make the payments. The drive away from Fort Carson was surreal. Sarah loaded her 10-year-old Honda Civic with everything she owned, which fit easily in the back seat and trunk. 3 years of military life had taught her to live with minimal possessions, but the Spartanness of her belongings seemed to underscore how completely her life had been upended. As she drove through the base gates for the last time, Sarah saw the hospital where she had spent the most meaningful years of her life. The building looked the same, institutional concrete and glass that housed some of the most advanced trauma medicine in the world. But for her, it had become a monument to the choice between conscience and career, between doing what was right and doing what was ordered. Her phone buzzed with a text message as she reached the highway. It was from an unknown number, but the message was clear. "Dr. Sarah, this is Janet from Trauma. S. Williams asked me to tell you he's doing well. His daughter drew you a picture, a doctor in purple scrubs. He says thank you." Sarah pulled over at the next rest stop and cried for the first time since the whole ordeal began. Not from sadness exactly, but from the overwhelming complexity of loss and purpose intertwined. She had lost everything she had worked for, but she had saved a life. She faced an uncertain future, but a father would go home to his daughter. The photograph attached to the text showed a child's drawing in purple crayon, a stick figure in medical scrubs with an enormous smile, and the words, "Thank you, Doctor," written in careful 8-year-old handwriting. Emma Williams had drawn her father's hero, never knowing that the hero was now driving away from the only career she had ever wanted, toward an uncertain future filled with debt and damaged reputation. But for the first time in weeks, Sarah smiled. The little girl in purple crayons had drawn something true, a doctor who had chosen to help someone who was hurt, regardless of the consequences. The rules and regulations, the classifications and protocols, all the complex machinery of military bureaucracy hadn't changed that simple truth. Sarah started her car and merged back onto the highway, carrying her few possessions and her compromised future toward whatever came next. In her rearview mirror, Fort Carson disappeared behind the Colorado mountains, taking with it the life she had planned, but leaving behind something harder to define: the knowledge that when faced with the choice between easy compliance and difficult conscience, she had chosen correctly. The road ahead was uncertain, marked by financial hardship and professional obstacles that might prove insurmountable. But somewhere behind her, Sergeant Williams was recovering. Emma was drawing purple pictures, and 47 minutes of unauthorized medicine had changed the trajectory of lives she might never see again. Sarah's apartment in Colorado Springs was a study in diminished circumstances, a one-bedroom unit in a complex that advertised affordable living for working professionals, which was code for housing for people whose careers had taken unexpected turns. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbor's television, and the carpet bore the accumulated stains of previous tenants who had also fallen on hard times. It had been 3 weeks since her discharge, and Sarah had fallen into a routine that felt like penance. She woke at 0430 hours, habit ingrained too deeply to break, then spent her mornings applying for medical positions that would inevitably be withdrawn once her background check revealed the circumstances of her military discharge. Her afternoons were devoted to freelance medical writing, technical articles that paid barely enough to cover rent, and the minimum payments on her student loans. The rejection letters had become a daily ritual. After careful consideration, while your qualifications are impressive, unfortunately, our federal contracts require. Each one was a polite variation on the same theme. Her decision to save Sergeant Williams' life had made her unemployable in any medical facility that wanted to maintain government relationships. On this particular morning, Sarah was reviewing her bank account, a depressing exercise that confirmed she had perhaps 6 weeks of financial runway left, when the knock came at her door. The sound was authoritative, official, the kind of knock that announced itself as government business rather than social call. Sarah looked through the peephole and felt her stomach drop. 2 black SUVs were parked in the visitor spaces outside her apartment complex, and 3 people in dark suits stood in her hallway. The woman in the center was tall, professionally dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command authority. The 2 men flanking her had the unmistakable posture of Secret Service agents, alert, scanning, hands positioned for quick access to concealed weapons. Sarah's first thought was that she was about to be arrested. Perhaps the military investigation had uncovered evidence of more serious wrongdoing. Perhaps her breach of classified protocols had been deemed criminal rather than merely disciplinary. She opened the door with hands that trembled slightly, preparing for the worst. "Dr. Sarah." The woman in the center spoke with a voice that carried both authority and something that might have been respect. "I'm Director Catherine Walsh, Deputy Director of the CIA. May we come in?" Sarah's apartment had never felt smaller than it did with 3 federal agents standing in her living room. Director Walsh was a woman in her 50s whose presence seemed to fill the space with the weight of government authority. She looked around the modest apartment with eyes that missed nothing. The medical journals stacked on the coffee table, the rejection letters visible on the kitchen counter, the photographs of Sarah's parents that were the only personal decorations in the sparse room. "Dr. Sarah, I'm here to discuss Sergeant Williams and the circumstances of your discharge from military service." Walsh's tone was businesslike, but not hostile. "What I'm about to tell you is classified information that will explain why your medical intervention 3 weeks ago was significant beyond your understanding." Sarah remained standing, uncertain whether she was about to be offered an explanation or a plea bargain. "Ma'am, I've already been discharged. I'm not sure what more there is to discuss." "Sit down, please." It wasn't quite an order, but it carried the expectation of compliance. Sarah sat on her second-hand couch, while Director Walsh remained standing, a positioning that emphasized the power differential in the room. "Sergeant Williams was not his real name," Walsh began. "The man you treated was Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, a deep-cover intelligence operative who had been embedded with terrorist cells for 18 months. The operation that resulted in his injuries was a mission to prevent a coordinated attack on 3 major American cities." Sarah felt the world shift slightly, the way it does when fundamental assumptions are suddenly revealed to be incomplete. Williams, Chen, hadn't been just another wounded soldier. He had been carrying intelligence that could prevent massive loss of life. The injuries he sustained occurred during the extraction phase of his mission, Walsh continued. He was carrying critical intelligence about the planned attacks, target locations, timing, method of attack. That intelligence was stored in an encrypted device that was surgically implanted to prevent its discovery, if he was captured. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The classified restrictions, the urgency of flying in specialists, the absolute prohibition on unauthorized personnel, it all made sense now. But it also raised questions that made her feel sick. "Ma'am, are you telling me that if he had died, 300 innocent Americans would likely have died in terrorist attacks that we couldn't have prevented without his intelligence?" Walsh's words were delivered without emotion, but their weight filled the room like a physical presence. The device he carried contained information that allowed us to intercept the attackers 48 hours before the planned attacks. Sarah tried to process what she was hearing. Her decision to violate orders hadn't just saved one man's life, it had potentially saved hundreds of lives. But that same decision had destroyed her career, left her facing financial ruin, and made her unemployable in the field she had dedicated her life to. "The irony," Walsh continued, "is that the very security protocols designed to protect the operation nearly caused its failure. By the time our specialists arrived from Walter Reed, Sergeant Chen would have been dead, and the intelligence would have died with him." One of the Secret Service agents moved closer to the window, a subtle adjustment that suggested this conversation was being monitored for security purposes. Sarah realized that her small apartment had become the center of a discussion involving national security at the highest levels. "Dr. Sarah, your actions 3 weeks ago prevented a catastrophic terrorist attack. 3 bombs targeting shopping centers in Dallas, Phoenix, and Seattle. The death toll would have been in the hundreds, possibly thousands when you account for secondary casualties and economic impact." Sarah felt tears threatening, but fought them back. "Then why was I discharged? Why has my career been destroyed?" "Because the operation was so classified that even the base commander wasn't fully briefed on its importance. The decision to discipline you was made by people who didn't understand what you had actually accomplished." Walsh's voice carried a note of what might have been regret. Sometimes the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, especially in intelligence operations. "Staff Sergeant Chen specifically requested that I be the one to inform you of the mission's success and your role in it. He wanted you to understand that your sacrifice wasn't meaningless, that the choice you made saved more lives than you could have imagined." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic and the neighbor's television. Sarah sat on her couch, surrounded by the debris of her former life, trying to comprehend that her career had been destroyed for an action that had prevented a terrorist attack. "What happens now?" she asked finally. Director Walsh smiled for the first time since entering the apartment. "Now, Dr. Sarah, we have a conversation about how the United States government can begin to make amends for the injustice you've suffered, and about how your country can properly honor what you've done." The morning light streaming through Sarah's apartment windows seemed different now, brighter somehow, carrying the promise that the worst part of her ordeal might finally be over. But Sarah had learned enough about government promises to be cautious about hope. "What kind of conversation?" she asked. "The kind that begins with a phone call from the President of the United States," Walsh replied. "He'd like to meet with you. Today." The Oval Office was smaller than Sarah had imagined, but its power was unmistakable. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the presidential seal woven into the carpet and casting long shadows across the desk where decisions were made that affected millions of lives. Sarah sat in one of the chairs facing the resolute desk, wearing her best civilian clothes, a simple dark suit that looked shabby next to the formal attire of the White House staff who had escorted her through the corridors of power. President Marcus Hayes entered the room with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any space he occupied. Sarah rose from her chair, uncertain of the proper protocol for meeting the Commander-in-Chief under circumstances that existed outside any normal chain of command. "Dr. Sarah, please sit," President Hayes said, his voice carrying the warmth that had helped him win 2 national elections. "I want to apologize personally for what you've been put through, and to ensure you understand how grateful this nation is for your actions." The President took his seat behind the historic desk, but his posture was informal, leaning forward in a way that suggested genuine engagement rather than ceremonial duty. Sarah had seen him on television countless times, but being in the same room revealed details that cameras couldn't capture. The lines around his eyes that spoke of the weight of constant decision-making, the way his hands moved when he spoke, the presence that marked someone who carried ultimate responsibility. "Director Walsh has briefed me on the full circumstances of the Fort Carson incident," President Hayes continued. "Your medical intervention saved the life of one of our most valuable intelligence assets and prevented what could have been the deadliest terrorist attack since 9/11's. The intelligence that Staff Sergeant Chen carried allowed us to intercept 3 separate bombing teams before they could reach their targets." Sarah nodded, still processing the magnitude of what she was being told. 3 weeks ago, she had been a disgraced former military doctor facing financial ruin. Now she was sitting in the Oval Office being thanked by the President for preventing a terrorist attack. "The injustice of your treatment is something that keeps me awake at night," President Hayes said. "A woman who prevented hundreds of deaths was discharged from military service and had her medical career destroyed because of classification protocols that prevented the people making decisions from understanding what was really at stake." The President opened a folder on his desk, revealing documents that bore the official seals of various government agencies. "Today I'm signing several orders that I hope will begin to address that injustice. First, your military discharge is being changed from administrative separation to honorable discharge, with commendation for exceptional service. Your military medical record will reflect that you acted with distinction in circumstances involving national security." Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't fully realized she was carrying. The change in her discharge status would remove the black mark that had made her unemployable in federal medical facilities. "Second," the President continued, "you are being promoted to Major in the Army Medical Corps Reserve, with full reinstatement of your medical privileges and an offer to return to active duty at any military medical facility of your choosing." The offer was generous beyond anything Sarah had dared to hope for, but she found herself thinking not about her own restoration, but about the broader implications of what had happened. Third, and this is where it gets interesting, President Hayes smiled, Congress has authorized a special recognition grant of $500,000 for your service to the nation. This is in addition to your military back pay and benefits, which will be restored retroactively. $500,000, Sarah's student loan debt, her financial crisis, her uncertain future, all of it resolved by a number that represented more money than her parents had ever possessed at one time. But even as she felt relief washing over her, Sarah was calculating other possibilities, other uses for resources that could make a difference beyond her own circumstances. Finally, the president reached for an ornate box on his desk. I'm presenting you with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor this nation can bestow. Your actions exemplify the best of American service, the willingness to do what's right regardless of personal cost. The medal was heavy in Sarah's hands, its weight both literal and symbolic. She thought about her parents, probably at work at this very moment, cleaning offices and never dreaming that their daughter was receiving the nation's highest civilian honor. Mr. President, Sarah said, finding her voice for the first time since entering the office, I'm honored by this recognition truly, but I need to ask you something about the bigger picture here. President Hayes raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting questions during what was designed to be a ceremonial moment. Sir, what happened to me happens to military medical personnel all the time. Not on this scale, and not with these consequences, but the conflict between medical judgment and military protocol is a daily reality for physicians in uniform. How many other doctors have faced impossible choices between saving lives and following orders? The president leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from ceremonial warmth to genuine interest. What are you suggesting, Dr. Sarah? I'm suggesting that my case isn't unique in its medical aspects, only in its security implications. Every military physician faces moments when protocol conflicts with patient care. The system that punished me for saving a life will punish others for making similar choices, even when national security isn't involved. Sarah set the medal carefully on the desk and looked directly at the most powerful person in the world. Mr. President, the greatest honor you could give me isn't this medal or the money or the reinstatement. It's the chance to fix the system so that other military physicians never have to choose between their medical oath and their military duty. The silence in the Oval Office stretched for long seconds, broken only by the distant sound of activity elsewhere in the White House. President Hayes studied Sarah's face with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people, to determining whether they were motivated by self-interest or genuine conviction. You want to use your platform to advocate for military medical reform, he said finally. Yes, sir. I want to create protocols that protect both national security and medical judgment. I want to establish review processes that prevent good doctors from being destroyed for making good medical decisions. And I want to ensure that classification levels never again prevent life-saving medical care. President Hayes smiled, but this time it was the expression of someone who had just encountered something unexpected and welcome. Dr. Sarah, you've just turned a medal ceremony into a policy proposal. I'm not sure that's ever happened before in this office. Sir, with respect, the medal is wonderful, but it doesn't solve the problem that created this situation in the first place. If we don't fix the system, someone else will face the same impossible choice I faced, and next time the outcome might be different. The president picked up a phone on his desk. Get me the Secretary of Defense and the Surgeon General. I want a meeting scheduled for this afternoon on military medical protocol reform. He looked back at Sarah. It seems, Dr. Sarah, that your service to this country is just beginning. As Sarah left the Oval Office, the Presidential Medal of Freedom secured in its presentation box, she realized that the meeting had been both an ending and a beginning. Her personal ordeal was over, her career restored, her financial future secured. But more importantly, she had been given the platform and resources to address the systematic problems that had created her crisis in the first place. The real work was just beginning. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the conference room of the newly established Williams Foundation for Military Medical Ethics, named for the man whose life had started a chain of events that would reshape military medicine. The room was modest compared to the Oval Office, but it buzzed with the energy of people committed to meaningful change. Around the conference table sat military physicians, policy experts, ethicists, and advocates, all working toward the goal of ensuring that medical professionals in uniform would never again face the impossible choice between protocol and patient care. The foundation had grown quickly, fueled by Sarah's grant money, private donations, and the attention generated by her story. What had begun as one woman's violation of military orders had evolved into a comprehensive examination of how classification levels and command structures could interfere with medical care. The Presidential Medal of Freedom had given Sarah credibility, but the substance of her reforms had given the foundation purpose. The Department of Defense has accepted our recommendations for the new Medical Emergency Override Protocol, announced Dr. James Murphy, a retired Army surgeon who had become the Foundation's policy director. Military physicians will now have clearly defined procedures for providing emergency medical care, even in classified situations, with post-incident review rather than prior authorization. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with exhaustion. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of congressional testimony, policy development, and media interviews. She had become the public face of military medical reform, traveling to bases across the country to speak with physicians who faced daily conflicts between medical judgment and military protocol. The new protocols weren't perfect, but they represented a fundamental shift in how the military approached the intersection of medicine and classification. No longer would doctors be forced to watch patients die while waiting for security clearances. No longer would medical professionals face career destruction for following their medical training in emergency situations. What about implementation timeline? Asked Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, who had left her own military position to join the foundation full-time. Amanda's decision to abandon her secure residency had surprised everyone, but she had explained it simply. I can't practice military medicine in a system that punishes people for saving lives. Phased rollout begins next month, Murphy replied. All major military medical facilities will have the new protocols in place within 6 months. Training for command staff and medical personnel starts immediately. Sarah's computer chimed with an incoming video call, and she smiled when she saw the caller ID. Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, the man she had known as Williams. His recovery had been complete, and he had returned to active duty, though no longer in deep cover operations. The intelligence community had decided that his value as an operative had been compromised by the publicity surrounding Sarah's case. Dr. Sarah, Chen's voice came through clearly as his image appeared on screen. Behind him, Sarah could see a typical military office, flag on the wall, regulation furniture, the institutional atmosphere she remembered from her own service. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Never, Sarah replied. How are you? How's Emma? Chen's face broke into a grin. Emma's great. Still obsessed with purple everything. She's actually here with me today. It's Take Your Daughter to Work Day, and she insisted on calling to thank the doctor who saved Daddy. A small face appeared on screen next to Chen's, 8-year-old Emma, whose purple backpack and purple hair clips made her look like an advertisement for her favorite color. Her smile was bright enough to light up the conference room. Hi, Dr. Sarah, Emma waved enthusiastically. Daddy says you made him better when he was really sick. I drew you another picture. Emma held up a drawing that was significantly more sophisticated than the crayon stick figure Sarah had seen 6 months earlier. This picture showed a detailed hospital scene with medical equipment, multiple doctors and nurses, and in the center, a figure in purple scrubs with the words, Hero Doctor, written in careful block letters. It's beautiful, Emma, Sarah said, feeling tears threatening. Thank you for thinking of me. Daddy says you got in trouble for helping him, but that you helped him anyway because that's what doctors do. Is that true?" Sarah looked around the conference room at her colleagues, at the policy documents and reform proposals that had grown from those 47 minutes of unauthorized medicine. "Yes, sweetie, that's true. Sometimes doing the right thing means getting in trouble, but it's still the right thing to do." "I'm going to be a doctor, too," Emma announced, with the confidence that only 8-year-olds possess. "And I'm going to help people, even if I get in trouble. Daddy says that's called courage." After the call ended, the conference room was quiet for a moment. Then Dr. Murphy cleared his throat and returned to the agenda. "The Senate subcommittee wants to expand our recommendations to include civilian emergency medical services. Apparently, there are similar issues with classified patients in federal hospitals." The work continued, the steady process of institutional change that would outlast any individual career or crisis. Sarah reviewed reports from military medical facilities where the new protocols were being tested, read letters from physicians who no longer feared career destruction for following their medical training, and planned the next phase of reforms that would address the broader intersection of national security and health care. As the meeting concluded, Sarah remained in the conference room looking out the window at the Washington, D.C. skyline. She thought about her parents, who now proudly displayed her Presidential Medal of Freedom next to her medical school diploma in their small apartment above the restaurant. They had finally understood that their daughter's trouble had been the kind that made them proud rather than worried. She thought about Sergeant Williams, Michael Chen, whose life had been saved by 47 minutes of unauthorized medicine. He was alive. Emma was drawing purple pictures, and hundreds of other lives had been saved because he had lived long enough to deliver critical intelligence. Most importantly, she thought about the military physicians who would never face the choice she had faced. The impossible decision between medical oath and military order had been eliminated, replaced by protocols that recognized that saving lives was the highest form of military service. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Dr. Sarah, this is Captain Lisa Park at Walter Reed. We just used the new medical emergency override protocol to treat a classified patient. The system worked exactly as designed. The patient is stable, the mission wasn't compromised, and no one had to choose between career and conscience. Thank you for making this possible." Sarah smiled and gathered her papers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new reforms to implement, new battles to fight in the ongoing war between bureaucracy and human need. But tonight she would go home to her small apartment, larger now, in a better neighborhood, but still modest by choice, and call her parents to tell them about Emma's picture and Michael's recovery, and the message from Captain Park. The cost of her decision had been everything she thought she wanted. The reward had been everything she didn't know she needed. And the work that had grown from 47 minutes of unauthorized medicine would continue long after she was gone, ensuring that other physicians would never face the choice between doing what was ordered and doing what was right. Because sometimes the most important victories weren't won in operating rooms or battlefields, but in conference rooms and policy documents, in the slow, steady work of making systems more human, one reform at a time. The Foundation's mission statement, framed on the wall behind Sarah's desk, captured the philosophy that had emerged from her ordeal. Medical professionals serve their highest calling when they place patient care above all other considerations. Our mission is to ensure that institutional structures support rather than hinder this fundamental commitment. 47 minutes had changed everything. The work to honor those 47 minutes would take a lifetime. In memory of all medical professionals who have faced impossible choices between conscience and protocol, and in honor of those who choose courage over compliance when lives hang in the balance.